Imagine, if you will, a world so far removed from our own that it feels like stepping into a dream. We're traveling back through time, not to witness the dramatic moments that fill history books, but to experience the quiet, everyday rhythms that actually defined human existence for hundreds of thousands of years. This is the Stone Age, a period so vast and encompassing that it stretches across nearly all of human history, beginning roughly 3.4 million years ago and ending only about 5,000 years ago in some parts of the world. The Stone Age wasn't a single moment in time, but rather an ocean of human experience, divided into three gentle waves, the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, and the Neolithic periods. Each of these eras flowed into the next like seasons changing, marked not by sudden revolutions but by the gradual accumulation of knowledge, the slow refinement of tools, and the patient development of skills that would carry our species forward. During the Paleolithic period, which lasted from about 2.6 million years ago to roughly 10,000 BCE, humans lived as hunter-gatherers in small, nomadic groups. Life moved at the pace of the seasons, governed by the availability of food, the migration patterns of animals, and the ever-changing moods of weather and landscape. There were no clocks, no schedules, no urgent deadlines. Time was measured in the length of shadows, the phases of the moon, and the subtle shifts in the natural world that only those deeply connected to their environment could perceive. The daily routine of a Paleolithic human would seem impossibly slow and meditative to our modern sensibilities. They would wake with the gradual lightening of the sky, their bodies naturally attuned to the rhythm of day and night without the artificial interference of electric lights or alarm clocks. The morning would begin with a careful assessment of the surroundings, a quiet communion with the landscape to understand what the day might offer. Food procurement was not the frantic rush to the grocery store that we know today, but rather a contemplative practice that required deep observation, patience, and an intimate knowledge of the natural world. They knew which plants were safe to eat and where to find them throughout the changing seasons. They understood the habits and movements of animals, not from books or documentaries, but from years of quiet observation and accumulated wisdom passed down through generations. Toolmaking was an art form that required not just skill, but a meditative focus that could span hours or even days. The creation of a simple stone axe involved selecting the right type of rock, understanding its grain and structure, and then carefully chipping away small pieces with precise strikes. Each blow of the hammer stone was deliberate and purposeful, guided by an understanding of physics and materials science that was intuitive rather than academic. The social structure of these early humans was remarkably egalitarian and peaceful. Without permanent settlements or accumulated wealth to defend, there was little cause for the large-scale conflicts that would later plague agricultural societies. Groups were small, typically consisting of 20 to 30 individuals who were often related to each other. Decisions were made collectively, resources were shared freely, and knowledge was considered the common property of the group. Children learned not through formal education but through constant observation and gradual participation in adult activities. A young person might spend years simply watching the elders work, slowly absorbing the countless subtle skills required for survival. There was no pressure to master everything quickly, no standardized tests or rigid curricula. Learning happened at a natural pace, guided by curiosity and necessity rather than artificial deadlines. The spiritual life of Paleolithic humans was intimately connected to their daily existence. They didn't separate the sacred from the mundane, but rather saw divinity in every aspect of the natural world. The changing seasons, the behavior of animals, the patterns of stars in the night sky, all of these were part of a living, breathing cosmos that they were privileged to participate in rather than dominate. Art during this period was not created for museums or galleries, but as an integral part of spiritual and social life. The famous cave paintings found in places like Lascaux and Altamira were not decorations but rather sacred spaces where the community could connect with the spiritual essence of the animals they hunted and the forces of nature that governed their lives. Sleep during the Paleolithic period followed natural patterns that our modern sleep researchers are only now beginning to understand and appreciate. Without artificial lighting, Humans naturally fell into a biphasic sleep pattern, with a longer period of sleep in the early evening, followed by a few hours of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night, and then another period of sleep until dawn. This middle-of-the-night wakeful period was often used for quiet reflection, storytelling, or intimate conversations that strengthened social bonds. The transition from the Paleolithic to the Mesolithic period, beginning around 10,000 BCE, marked the end of the last ice age and the beginning of a warmer, more stable climate. This change brought new opportunities and challenges, as humans began to adapt to different environments and develop new technologies. The Mesolithic period was characterized by the development of more sophisticated tools, including the bow and arrow, and the beginning of more permanent settlements near reliable water sources. During the Mesolithic period, humans began to develop a more complex relationship with their environment. They still lived primarily as hunter-gatherers, but they began to manage their surroundings more actively, using controlled burns to encourage the growth of certain plants and creating fish weirs and animal traps that could provide food with less active hunting. This period also saw the development of the first boats and the exploration of coastal and island environments. The ability to travel by water opened up new territories and resources, leading to increased trade and cultural exchange between different groups. These early maritime adventures required not just courage but also deep knowledge of weather patterns, ocean currents, and celestial navigation. As our journey through time continues, we find ourselves approaching what would have been a typical Mesolithic settlement, nestled in a gentle valley beside a meandering river. The landscape spreads before us like a living tapestry, unmarked by roads, fences, or the geometric precision of agricultural fields. This is a world shaped entirely by natural forces, where every curve of the riverbank, every cluster of trees, every meadow of wild grasses has evolved over millennia without human interference. The settlement itself is barely visible at first glance, so perfectly integrated into the natural landscape that it seems to have grown from the earth itself. There are no permanent structures as we would recognize them, no stone foundations or wooden frames reaching toward the sky. Instead, the living spaces consist of carefully constructed shelters made from materials that were freely available in the immediate environment, bent saplings covered with animal hides, lean-tos constructed against large boulders, and simple windbreaks woven from branches and leaves. The approach to this ancient community requires us to abandon all our modern expectations about what constitutes a home or a settlement. These structures were not meant to last for generations, but rather to serve the immediate needs of a group that might move on when the seasons changed or when local resources became depleted. There was a beautiful impermanence to their architecture, an acceptance that all things in life are temporary and that adaptation is more valuable than permanence. As we draw closer, the first thing that strikes us is the profound silence that permeates this ancient world. There are no mechanical sounds, no hum of electricity, no rumble of engines or beeping of electronic devices. The only sounds are those that have remained constant throughout human history, the gentle murmur of running water, the whisper of wind through leaves, the distant call of birds, and the soft crackling of a carefully tended fire. The air itself feels different here, clean and pure in a way that we can barely imagine in our modern world. Every breath brings with it the fresh sense of the natural world, the earthy smell of rich soil, the sweet fragrance of wild flowers, the crisp scent of flowing water, and the comforting aroma of wood smoke. These are the only perfumes our ancestors knew, and they were perfectly sufficient to create a sensory environment that was both stimulating and soothing. The visual landscape is equally remarkable in its simplicity and natural beauty. Colors are muted and harmonious, following the subtle palette that nature provides, the various greens of different plants, the browns and grays of earth and stone, the blue-gray of the flowing river, and the ever-changing colors of the sky as clouds drift overhead. There are no artificial colors, no synthetic materials, no reflective surfaces to create jarring contrasts or overwhelming visual stimulation. The people we might encounter in this ancient settlement move with a grace and purpose that speaks to their deep connection with their environment. Their movements are economical and efficient, each gesture serving a specific purpose without wasted motion or unnecessary drama. They walk with the steady, measured pace of those who have nowhere urgent to be, who understand that most tasks are best accomplished with patience and deliberate attention rather than hurried efficiency. Their clothing is practical and beautiful in its simplicity, made entirely from materials provided by the animals they hunt and the plants they gather. Leather garments, softened through careful processing with natural oils and plant materials, provide protection from the elements while allowing for the freedom of movement necessary for their active lifestyle. These clothes are decorated not with artificial dyes or synthetic materials, but with natural pigments, carved bone ornaments, and intricate patterns that reflect their understanding of the world around them. The tools and implements scattered around the settlement tell the story of human ingenuity working within natural constraints. Stone axes with carefully shaped handles, spears tipped with precisely knapped flint points, bone needles polished smooth through use, and wooden bowls carved with patient skill from burled wood. Each of these items represents hours or even days of careful work, performed not in factories or workshops but in the gentle rhythm of daily life, often while engaged in conversation or while watching children play. The organization of the settlement reflects a social structure that is both sophisticated and refreshingly uncomplicated. There are no obvious signs of hierarchy or inequality, no grand structures that speak to accumulated wealth or political power. Instead, the arrangement of shelters and work areas suggests a community where decisions are made collectively and resources are shared according to need rather than individual accumulation. The central fire pit serves as the heart of the community, a gathering place where cooking, tool-making, storytelling, and social interaction all take place in an easy, natural flow. The fire itself is never allowed to die completely, tended constantly by various members of the group who understand that maintaining this source of warmth, light, and cooking heat is a sacred responsibility that ensures the survival and comfort of the entire community. Around this central area, various workstations are arranged in a seemingly casual but actually quite purposeful pattern. Here, a collection of stones suitable for tool making. There, an area where hides are stretched and processed. Nearby, a patch of ground where medicinal and food plants are sorted and prepared. Each of these work areas has evolved naturally based on practical considerations: proximity to the fire for warmth and light, access to water for cleaning and processing, shelter from prevailing winds. The children in this ancient community move freely throughout the settlement, their games and exploration seamlessly integrated into the adult world of work and responsibility. There are no playgrounds or designated play areas, because the entire natural world serves as their playground and classroom. They learn by watching, by imitating, by gradually taking on small responsibilities that will eventually grow into the full range of adult skills. As evening approaches, the pace of activity gradually slows, not because of any artificial schedule or imposed bedtime, but because the dimming light naturally limits certain types of work and encourages other, more contemplative activities. The community gathers around the fire, where the day's experiences are shared through story and song, where knowledge is passed from elder to younger, and where the bonds of community are strengthened through shared ritual and celebration. As we become more comfortable in this ancient setting, we begin to understand the profound differences between our modern relationship with time and the way our Stone Age ancestors experienced the flow of their days. Here, in this peaceful valley settlement, time moves like honey, thick and golden, each moment allowed to unfold completely before the next one begins. There is no rushing, no artificial urgency, no feeling that one must constantly be productive or efficient according to some external standard. The morning routine in this ancient community unfolds with a ritualistic quality that modern life has almost entirely lost. People rise not to the harsh sound of an alarm clock, but to the gradual lightening of the sky and the gentle stirring of others in the community. The first person awake might quietly tend the fire, adding dry wood and coaxing the embers back to gentle flame. This simple act serves not just a practical purpose, but also a spiritual one, as fire was considered a living entity that required care and respect. As others gradually wake and emerge from their sleeping spaces, there is no frantic rush to prepare for the day. Instead, people moved slowly and deliberately, taking time to greet each other, to observe the weather and the condition of their surroundings, and to mentally prepare for whatever tasks the day might bring. This careful, contemplative start to the day serves to center each person and connect them to the rhythms of both the natural world and their community. The preparation of the morning meal is a communal activity that serves multiple purposes beyond simple nutrition. As people gather around the central fire, they share observations about the weather, discuss plans for the day, and maintain the social bonds that hold the community together. The food itself is simple but nourishing, perhaps leftover meat from yesterday's hunt, wild berries gathered the previous evening, and herbal teas made from plants that grow nearby. The conversation flows naturally from practical matters to stories and shared memories. An elder might recount a similar weather pattern from years past, leading to discussion about seasonal changes and what they might mean for the community's plans. A successful foraging expedition might be described in detail, not just to share information about where certain plants can be found, but to celebrate the skill and knowledge that made the success possible. After the morning meal, the community gradually disperses to various activities, but there is no sense of rigid scheduling or imposed deadlines. Some might head out to check fish traps set in the river the previous day. Others might begin the long, meditative process of working on tools or processing materials gathered earlier. Still others might remain near the settlement to tend to various ongoing projects, maintaining shelters, processing food for preservation, or caring for children too young to participate in more distant activities. The process of toolmaking, which might seem boring or tedious to our modern sensibilities, was actually a deeply satisfying and almost meditative practice. Creating a stone axe, for example, required not just technical skill but also a kind of moving meditation. The craftsperson would select a suitable piece of stone, often having observed and considered potential raw materials for days or weeks before making a choice. The actual shaping of the tool required hundreds of small, precise strikes, each one carefully considered and deliberately placed. This work was rarely done in isolation. Tool-making often took place in a social setting, with several people working on different projects while maintaining a gentle flow of conversation. Stories were told, knowledge was shared, and skills were passed from experienced craftspeople to eager learners. The rhythm of the work created a natural soundtrack to the conversation, the regular tapping of stone on stone providing a percussive background that was both soothing and hypnotic. The gathering of food was equally contemplative and socially integrated. Groups might venture out together to collect wild plants, their progress slow and observant as they moved through the landscape. Each plant species required different knowledge: when it was ready to harvest, which parts were edible or useful, how to process it for maximum nutrition or medicinal benefit, and how much could be taken without damaging the plant's ability to reproduce and continue providing for future seasons. This deep knowledge of the natural world was not learned from books or formal instruction, but acquired through years of careful observation and hands-on experience. An experienced gatherer could look at a landscape and see not just trees and bushes, but a complex ecosystem providing dozens of different resources that could be harvested at different times of the year. They knew which plants would be ready next week, which ones wouldn't be available for another month, and which ones were best left alone this year to ensure a good harvest in future seasons. The hunting activities of the community followed similar patterns of patience, observation, and respect for the natural world. Hunters didn't simply chase after animals with weapons, but rather studied animal behavior, learned migration patterns, and developed strategies that required minimal effort while providing maximum success. A successful hunt was the result of days or weeks of preparation, observation, and planning, followed by a brief period of coordinated action. But perhaps more importantly, hunting was surrounded by ritual and ceremony that acknowledged the spiritual significance of taking animal life for human survival. Before, during, and after a hunt, there were prayers, ceremonies, and thanksgiving rituals that maintained the community's understanding of their place in the larger web of life. These practices served not just spiritual purposes, but practical ones as well, ensuring that hunting was done sustainably and with respect for the animal populations that provided for human needs. The late afternoon brought different rhythms and activities. As the light began to soften and the air grew cooler, people naturally gravitated back toward the central area of the settlement. This was a time for completing the day's work, for sharing the results of various expeditions and activities, and for beginning the slow transition toward evening and rest. Children who had spent the day observing and gradually participating in adult activities would now have opportunities to practice skills they had been learning. Under careful supervision, they might try their hand at simple toolmaking, help with food preparation, or assist with the maintenance of shelters and equipment. This gradual integration into adult responsibilities was done without pressure or formal instruction, allowing each child to learn at their own pace according to their interests and natural abilities. As the day drew to a close, the community would gather once again around the central fire for the evening meal. This was typically the most substantial meal of the day, featuring whatever had been successfully hunted, gathered, or caught during the day's activities. The preparation and consumption of this meal was another opportunity for social bonding, storytelling, and the sharing of knowledge and experiences. As the sun begins its gentle descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of amber and rose, we find ourselves fully immersed in the peaceful rhythms of Stone Age life. The settlement around us continues its quiet bustle of activity, but there's an unhurried quality to everything that feels almost otherworldly to our modern sensibilities. This is a time when humans lived in perfect harmony with the natural cycles of day and night, when the approaching darkness was not something to be fought with artificial lights, but rather embraced as a natural time for reflection, community, and rest. The evening fire has been built up again, its warm glow creating a circle of light and comfort in the growing darkness. The flames dance and flicker, casting moving shadows that seem to bring the surrounding landscape to life. This fire serves as the heart of the community, a gathering place where the day's experiences are shared and processed, where stories are told that connect the present generation to the wisdom of the past, and where the social bonds that hold the group together are strengthened and renewed. Around this fire, we observe the gentle interactions that defined human social life for thousands of years before the complications of modern civilization. There are no hierarchies of wealth or status, no artificial divisions based on accumulated possessions or political power. Instead, people are valued for their knowledge, their skills, their wisdom, and their contributions to the well-being of the community. The elder who knows where to find certain medicinal plants is as respected as the young hunter who can track game across difficult terrain. The conversation flows naturally from practical matters to deeper philosophical questions. Someone might ask about the meaning of unusual animal behavior observed during the day, leading to discussion about the interconnectedness of all living things. A child's innocent question about why the seasons change might prompt a storytelling session that weaves together practical knowledge about natural cycles with mythological explanations that help make sense of the larger mysteries of existence. These stories are not mere entertainment, but rather the primary means by which knowledge, values, and cultural identity are transmitted from one generation to the next. Each tale carries multiple layers of meaning, practical information about survival skills, moral guidance about how to live in harmony with others, and spiritual insights about humanity's place in the larger cosmos. The stories are told not just with words, but with gestures, vocal inflections, and dramatic pauses that make them come alive in the imagination of the listeners. As we settle more deeply into this ancient evening routine, we begin to understand how different the human relationship with darkness was in this era. Without electric lights to extend the day artificially, darkness was not something to be banished or feared, but rather accepted as a natural part of the daily cycle that brought its own gifts and opportunities. The night sky, unpolluted by artificial light, revealed itself in all its stunning glory, providing not just aesthetic pleasure but also practical information about navigation, seasons, and the passage of time. The approach of nighttime initiated a gradual slowing down of activities, a natural transition from the active pursuits of the day to the more contemplative and restful practices of the evening. Work that required good light was set aside, to be resumed the following day. Instead, this was a time for activities that could be performed in the gentle glow of firelight, the final preparation of food, the mending of clothes and tools, the crafting of simple implements that required more touch than sight. But more than anything, the evening was a time for human connection. Without the distractions of television, internet, or any of the countless forms of electronic entertainment that dominate our modern evenings, people had no choice but to interact with each other directly. These interactions were rich and meaningful in ways that we can barely imagine today. Conversations could develop slowly and deeply, without interruption or distraction, allowing people to really listen to each other and to share their thoughts and experiences in meaningful ways. The children in this ancient community experienced bedtime as a gradual, natural transition rather than a sudden imposition of adult authority. As the fire burned lower and conversation became quieter, young ones would naturally begin to feel sleepy. They might curl up against a parent or other trusted adult, listening to the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle crackling of the fire until sleep overtook them naturally. There were no artificial bedtimes, no struggles over when to go to sleep, because the natural rhythms of light and darkness regulated sleep cycles in ways that felt comfortable and natural to everyone. The process of preparing for sleep in this ancient context was itself a form of meditation and spiritual practice. Without the artificial lighting that disrupts our natural circadian rhythms, people became sleepy as darkness fell, their bodies naturally producing the hormones necessary for restful sleep. The preparation for rest was simple but purposeful, banking the fire so it would provide warmth through the night, checking that shelters were secure against weather, and taking a few moments to reflect on the day's experiences and express gratitude for its blessings. Sleep in the Stone Age followed patterns that modern sleep researchers are only now beginning to understand and appreciate. Rather than the single, uninterrupted sleep period that we consider normal today, our ancestors typically experienced what researchers call biphasic sleep. They would sleep for several hours after dark, then wake naturally in the middle of the night for a period of quiet wakefulness, before returning to sleep until dawn. This period of nighttime wakefulness was not considered problematic or insomnia-inducing as it would be in our modern context. Instead, it was embraced as a valuable time for reflection, quiet conversation, meditation, and spiritual practice. It was during these quiet hours that some of the most important thinking and processing of the day's experiences took place. People might lie quietly, thinking through problems or challenges they were facing, or they might engage in whispered conversations with their sleeping partners that strengthened intimate bonds and shared understanding. The quality of sleep experienced by our Stone Age ancestors was also remarkably different from what most modern people experience. Without the stress of artificial schedules, electronic stimulation, or the countless anxieties of modern life, sleep came easily and naturally. The physical exhaustion from a day spent in active engagement with the natural world, combined with the mental satisfaction of meaningful work and social connection, created the perfect conditions for deep, restorative rest. The sleeping arrangements themselves reflected the communal nature of Stone Age society. People didn't sleep in isolated, private bedrooms as we do today, but rather in shared spaces where the warmth and security of community provided comfort and protection. Family groups might sleep together in the same shelter, and even the larger community remained within earshot of each other, creating a sense of security and connection that continued even through the night. This communal approach to sleep had practical advantages as well. In a world without police or security systems, the safety of the group depended on everyone remaining alert to potential dangers. By sleeping in proximity to each other, the community created a natural early warning system where anyone who sensed trouble could quickly alert the others. But more than mere practicality, this sleeping arrangement reflected a deep understanding that humans are social beings who thrive on connection and community even during the most vulnerable hours of rest. As the night deepens around this ancient settlement, we find ourselves entering into the profound contemplative practices that sustained our ancestors through countless generations. The fire has settled into a steady, gentle glow, its light creating a sacred space where the deepest aspects of human wisdom were nurtured and shared. This is the time when the most important learning took place, when the mysteries of existence were explored not through books or formal education, but through direct experience and intuitive understanding. The transition from the active day to the contemplative evening follows natural rhythms that our modern world has almost entirely forgotten. Without artificial lighting to extend productive activity into the night hours, our ancestors naturally shifted into more introspective modes of being as darkness fell. This wasn't seen as lost time or wasted hours, but rather as an essential part of human development and spiritual growth. In this gentle firelight, we observe forms of knowledge transmission that were far more sophisticated than our modern educational systems might suggest. The wisdom of the Stone Age was not contained in written texts or formal curricula, but rather embodied in the lived experience of individuals who had spent decades learning to read the subtle signs of the natural world. This knowledge was passed on not through lectures or demonstrations, but through story, metaphor, and gradual initiation into deeper levels of understanding. An elder might begin with what seems like a simple observation about the behavior of animals or the changing patterns of weather. But as the conversation develops, layers of meaning emerge that connect immediate practical concerns to larger philosophical and spiritual insights. The migration patterns of birds might lead to discussion about the importance of knowing when to stay and when to move on. The growth cycles of plants might illuminate principles about patience, timing, and the value of allowing things to develop naturally without forcing or rushing. These teaching moments were not planned or structured in advance, but rather arose spontaneously from the natural flow of community life. A question from a young person might prompt an extended exploration of some aspect of survival knowledge. An unusual event observed during the day might become the starting point for discussing larger principles about how to live in harmony with natural forces. The wisdom emerged organically from the intersection of practical experience and reflective consideration. The Stone Age understanding of human psychology was remarkably sophisticated, even though it was never formalized into academic theories or therapeutic systems. These ancient people understood that mental and emotional well-being depended on maintaining proper relationships, with the natural environment, with other members of the community, with the spiritual forces that governed existence, and with one's own inner nature. Problems were not seen as individual pathologies to be treated in isolation, but rather as symptoms of broken relationships that needed to be restored and healed. The contemplative practices that emerged in this context were beautifully simple and yet profoundly effective. Sitting quietly by the fire, watching the flames dance and feeling the warmth on one's skin, became a form of moving meditation that calmed the mind and opened the heart. The rhythmic sounds of the night, the gentle crackling of burning wood, the distant call of night birds, the soft murmur of the river, created a natural soundtrack for inner reflection and spiritual practice. These ancient people understood something that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to rediscover, that the human brain requires periods of undirected, non-productive time in order to process experiences, integrate learning, and maintain optimal mental health. The evening hours around the fire provided exactly this kind of restorative downtime, allowing the mind to wander freely without the pressure to accomplish specific tasks or achieve particular goals. The practice of storytelling that took place during these evening gatherings served functions that went far beyond mere entertainment. Stories were the primary means by which psychological healing took place, emotional conflicts were resolved, and individuals were helped to understand their place in the larger scheme of existence. A person struggling with fear might hear tales of courage and resourcefulness that provided both practical strategies and emotional inspiration. Someone dealing with loss might be offered stories that placed grief in the context of natural cycles of death and renewal. The communal nature of these storytelling sessions meant that everyone benefited from the wisdom being shared, even if the stories were initially prompted by one person's particular needs. The entire community participated in the healing and growth of each individual member, creating a form of group therapy that was far more effective than most modern psychological interventions. Problems were not seen as private matters to be dealt with in isolation, but rather as opportunities for the entire community to deepen its understanding and strengthen its bonds. As the evening progressed and people began to feel naturally sleepy, the transition toward rest took on an almost ceremonial quality. This wasn't the abrupt shutdown of activity that characterizes modern bedtime routines, but rather a gradual settling into deeper and more contemplative states of consciousness. People might remain awake for a while after lying down, continuing to listen to quiet conversations or simply enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of the settlement at night. The physical environment of Stone Age sleep was itself conducive to contemplative states of mind. Sleeping on the ground, surrounded by natural materials and within the sounds and scents of the natural world, created a sense of connection to the earth that most modern people never experience. The gentle rustling of leaves, the distant sounds of nocturnal animals, and the subtle changes in air temperature and humidity throughout the night provided a rich sensory environment that enhanced rather than disrupted the sleep experience. Without the artificial stimulation of electric lights, television, or electronic devices, the mind naturally shifted into the slower brainwave patterns associated with deep relaxation and spiritual awareness. The transition from waking consciousness to sleep was gradual and gentle, often accompanied by a natural review of the day's experiences and a sense of gratitude for the gifts and lessons it had provided. The practice of what we might now call lucid dreaming or conscious dreaming was much more common among Stone Age peoples than it is in our modern world. Without the psychological barriers and cultural skepticism that often prevent modern people from remembering or valuing their dreams, our ancestors understood dreams as important sources of guidance, insight, and spiritual communication. Dreams were discussed openly in the community, interpreted collectively, and used as sources of practical guidance for decision-making and problem-solving. The middle-of-the-night wakeful period that was a natural part of Stone Age sleep patterns provided additional opportunities for contemplative practice. During these quiet hours, people might engage in forms of meditation that were perfectly suited to their circumstances, simply lying still and observing the sensations in their bodies, listening to the sounds of the night, or allowing their minds to wander freely through memories, plans, and creative insights. This period of nighttime wakefulness was also a time for intimate connection between partners and family members. Quiet conversations that deepened understanding and strengthened emotional bonds often took place during these gentle hours. Without the pressure of daytime responsibilities or the presence of the larger community, people could share their deepest thoughts, fears, hopes, and dreams in an atmosphere of perfect safety and acceptance. As we settle even more deeply into the contemplative rhythms of Stone Age life, we begin to experience something that has become almost entirely foreign to our modern world, the profound peace that comes from living in complete harmony with natural cycles and rhythms. The night around us has reached its deepest point, that sacred time when the boundary between waking and sleeping, between conscious and unconscious awareness, becomes beautifully fluid and permeable. The fire has burned down to glowing embers, providing just enough warmth and light to maintain a sense of comfort and security without disrupting the natural progression towards sleep. This gentle illumination creates an atmosphere that is perfectly suited to the deepest forms of contemplative practice, where the mind can release its grip on the concerns and activities of the day and sink into states of awareness that are both profoundly restful and mysteriously enlightening. In this ancient setting, we begin to understand how different the human relationship with consciousness was before the advent of artificial stimulation and technological distraction. Without the constant input of information and entertainment that characterizes modern life, the mind naturally settles into deeper, more peaceful states. The chatter of mental activity that we often mistake for thinking gradually subsides, revealing beneath it a profound stillness that is both empty and full, silent and eloquent. The Stone Age understanding of consciousness was not based on abstract philosophical theories, but rather on direct, experiential knowledge of the various states of awareness that humans can access. These ancient people knew, through countless hours of quiet observation and contemplative practice, that consciousness is not a single, fixed state but rather a fluid spectrum of experiences ranging from active, goal-oriented thinking to the deepest states of meditative absorption and spiritual insight. The evening practices that we observe in this ancient community are designed to guide consciousness naturally through this spectrum, allowing each person to experience the full range of human awareness without force or artificial manipulation. The gradual transition from the social activities of early evening to the more solitary contemplative practices of late night follows the natural rhythm of consciousness as it prepares for the restoration and renewal that takes place during sleep. As people settle into their sleeping places around the settlement, they carry with them a sense of completion and satisfaction that comes from having lived a full, meaningful day. Unlike the restless anxiety that often accompanies modern bedtime routines, where people worry about unfinished tasks and tomorrow's obligations, the Stone Age approach to rest was characterized by a deep sense of trust in the natural order of things and confidence in the community's ability to meet whatever challenges the future might bring. The practice of lying quietly in the darkness, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the natural world, becomes a form of meditation that requires no special training or technique. The earth beneath their bodies provides a stable, grounding presence that helps to release physical tension and emotional stress. The sounds of night birds, rustling leaves, and flowing water create a natural soundtrack that guides the mind toward increasingly peaceful states of awareness. In this environment, sleep is not seen as a mere biological necessity or a temporary escape from the demands of waking life, but rather as a sacred time when consciousness can explore realms of experience that are not available during normal waking hours. Dreams are understood as meaningful communications from the deeper levels of the psyche, offering guidance, insight, and connection to spiritual realities that transcend ordinary physical existence. The quality of sleep experienced in this ancient context is remarkably different from what most modern people experience. Without the artificial stimulation of electric lights, caffeine, alcohol, or pharmaceutical substances, sleep comes naturally and easily. The physical exhaustion from a day spent in meaningful physical activity, combined with the emotional satisfaction of contributing to community well-being, creates the perfect conditions for deep, restorative rest. But more than mere physical restoration, Stone Age sleep served important psychological and spiritual functions that our modern understanding of sleep is only beginning to appreciate. The brain uses the hours of sleep not just to rest and repair physical tissues, but also to process and integrate the experiences of the day, to strengthen memory and learning, and to maintain the delicate balance of neurotransmitters and hormones that regulate mood, cognition, and spiritual insight. The ancient practice of what researchers now call segmented sleep, sleeping for several hours, waking for a period of quiet contemplation, then returning to sleep until dawn, provided additional opportunities for the deeper processing of experience and the integration of conscious and unconscious awareness. During the period of nighttime wakefulness, people often experienced states of consciousness that were neither fully awake nor asleep, but rather something in between that allowed for unique forms of insight and spiritual experience. These quiet midnight hours were often the time when the most profound realizations occurred, when solutions to complex problems emerged spontaneously, and when people felt most connected to the larger spiritual forces that governed their lives. The combination of physical relaxation, mental quietude, and spiritual openness created ideal conditions for the kind of intuitive insight that cannot be forced or manufactured through willpower alone. The communal nature of Stone Age sleeping arrangements meant that even during these deeply personal experiences, people remained connected to the supportive presence of their community. The knowledge that loved ones were sleeping nearby provided a sense of security and belonging that enhanced rather than interfered with individual contemplative practice. The occasional gentle sounds of others breathing, shifting position, or murmuring in their sleep served as comforting reminders of human connection and shared experience. This balance between solitude and community, between individual contemplative practice and shared social experience, represents one of the great achievements of Stone Age culture. Unlike modern people, who often feel they must choose between personal spiritual development and active participation in community life, our ancient ancestors understood that these two aspects of human experience are not only compatible but actually enhance and support each other. The spiritual practices that emerged naturally from Stone Age life were not separate from ordinary daily activities, but rather woven seamlessly into every aspect of existence. The careful attention required for successful hunting or gathering became a form of mindfulness meditation. The patient, repetitive work of toolmaking became an opportunity for contemplative absorption. The social interactions around the evening fire became a form of group spiritual practice that strengthened both individual awareness and community bonds. As the night deepens and people sink into progressively deeper states of rest and contemplation, we begin to experience something of the profound peace that sustained our ancestors through countless generations of human development. This is not the temporary relaxation that comes from temporary escape from stress, but rather the deep, abiding peace that emerges from living in complete harmony with the natural order of existence. The transition from waking consciousness to sleep in this ancient context is not an abrupt shift from one state to another, but rather a gradual, flowing movement through various levels of awareness. People might remain conscious of their surroundings even as their bodies settle into deep relaxation. They might experience the gentle play of thoughts and images that precede sleep as a form of natural entertainment and insight rather than as distraction or disturbance. In the deepest hours of this Stone Age night, we find ourselves entering into a realm of consciousness that modern civilization has almost entirely forgotten. This is the sacred time when the boundaries between self and world, between individual awareness and cosmic consciousness, naturally begin to dissolve. Our ancient ancestors understood this period not as empty time to be filled with activity, but as precious opportunity for the deepest forms of spiritual communion and transcendent insight. The settlement around us has grown profoundly quiet, with only the gentlest sounds of sleeping breath and the soft whisper of wind through leaves to mark the passage of time. The fire has settled into the most subtle glow, its embers pulsing gently like a slow, cosmic heartbeat that connects our little human community to the vast rhythms of the universe. In this sacred darkness, illuminated only by starlight and the faint radiance of glowing coals, consciousness naturally expands beyond its ordinary boundaries to embrace vastly larger perspectives and deeper truths. This is the time when our Stone Age ancestors experienced what we might now call mystical or transcendent states of consciousness, though they would not have used such formal terms. For them, these experiences were simply natural expressions of human awareness when it is allowed to function without the artificial constraints and distractions of civilized life. The ego mind, with its constant stream of worries, plans, and desires, gradually settles into quietude, revealing beneath it a vast, peaceful awareness that encompasses far more than individual identity. In this expanded state of consciousness, the ancient people experienced a profound sense of unity with the natural world that surrounded them. They felt their individual breath merging with the breath of the wind, their heartbeat synchronizing with the pulse of life that flows through all living things. The boundaries that normally separate self from environment became permeable and fluid, allowing for a direct, immediate experience of the interconnectedness that modern physics describes but that our ancestors knew through direct, intimate contact. This experience of unity was not merely philosophical or theoretical, but intensely practical and life-affirming. When people felt themselves to be part of the larger web of existence rather than separate from it, they naturally acted with greater wisdom, compassion, and ecological sensitivity. Their decisions were guided not just by narrow self-interest, but by an intuitive understanding of how their actions would affect the larger community of life of which they were part. The spiritual practices that emerged from this consciousness were beautifully simple and yet profoundly effective. Lying quietly under the vast canopy of stars, feeling the solid earth beneath their bodies and the infinite sky above, people naturally entered into states of meditation that required no special techniques or formal training. The natural world itself served as both teacher and temple, offering constant opportunities for spiritual insight and transcendent experience. The quality of awareness that characterized these deep night hours was fundamentally different from ordinary waking consciousness. Instead of the focused, goal-oriented attention that dominated daytime activities, nighttime awareness was spacious, receptive, and panoramic. People could simultaneously be aware of their own breathing, the sounds of the natural world around them, the sensation of air moving across their skin, and the vast presence of the cosmos stretching infinitely in all directions. This multidimensional awareness allowed for forms of insight and understanding that are impossible to achieve through ordinary analytical thinking. Complex problems that had seemed intractable during the day often resolved themselves spontaneously during these quiet hours, as the deeper intelligence of the unconscious mind was allowed to operate without interference from the ego's need to control and direct every aspect of experience. The dreams that emerged from this consciousness were remarkably vivid and meaningful, often providing guidance for practical decisions as well as profound insights into the nature of existence. Unlike modern people, who often dismiss dreams as meaningless psychological phenomena, our Stone Age ancestors understood dreams as important communications from the deeper levels of reality that are normally hidden from ordinary awareness. Dream experiences were shared openly within the community and interpreted collectively, creating a rich, ongoing dialogue between conscious and unconscious awareness that enhanced both individual wisdom and collective understanding. Dreams were seen as bridges between the visible world of everyday experience and the invisible world of spiritual forces and deeper truths that governed the unfolding of events in the physical realm. The practice of what we might now call dream incubation, consciously requesting guidance or insight through dreams, was a natural part of Stone Age spiritual practice. Before falling asleep, people might formulate specific questions or requests for guidance, then allow their dreams to provide responses in the symbolic language of the unconscious. This practice created an ongoing conversation between conscious intention and unconscious wisdom that guided decision-making and problem-solving in remarkably effective ways. As the night progressed toward its deepest point, many people experienced what can only be described as states of cosmic consciousness, where individual awareness merged temporarily with the vast intelligence that governs the universe. During these experiences, the artificial separation between observer and observed, between knower and known, dissolved completely, revealing the fundamental unity that underlies all apparent diversity and separation. These transcendent experiences were not seen as rare or exceptional events, but rather as natural expressions of human consciousness when it is allowed to function without artificial interference. The conditions of Stone Age life, the intimate connection with natural rhythms, the absence of artificial stimulation, the supportive presence of community, and the regular practice of contemplative awareness, created ideal circumstances for these expanded states of consciousness to emerge spontaneously and regularly. The insights that emerged from these transcendent experiences were not abstract or theoretical, but immediately practical and life-enhancing. People who regularly experienced cosmic consciousness naturally developed greater compassion, wisdom, and skill in dealing with the challenges of daily life. They understood intuitively how to live in harmony with natural forces, how to maintain health and well-being, and how to create and maintain peaceful, cooperative relationships with others. The integration of these transcendent experiences into ordinary daily life was seamless and natural. Unlike modern people, who often struggle to connect peak spiritual experiences with practical concerns, our Stone Age ancestors saw no separation between spiritual insight and practical wisdom. The same expanded awareness that allowed for mystical union with cosmic consciousness also provided guidance for hunting, gathering, tool-making, and community decision-making. As we participate in this ancient rhythm of transcendence and integration, we begin to understand something of the profound wisdom that sustained human civilization for hundreds of thousands of years. This was not the primitive, brutish existence that popular imagination often portrays, but rather a sophisticated and deeply satisfying way of life that provided for all human needs, physical, emotional, social, and spiritual. The peace that permeates this ancient night is not the temporary calm that comes from temporary escape from problems, but rather the deep, abiding peace that emerges from living in complete alignment with the fundamental principles that govern existence. This is the peace of knowing one's proper place in the larger scheme of things, of feeling completely supported by the intelligence and love that flow through all creation, of understanding that individual life is both precious and temporary, meaningful and part of something infinitely larger than personal concerns. As this profound Stone Age night moves toward its final phase, we find ourselves naturally transitioning from the transcendent heights of cosmic consciousness toward the gentle, nurturing embrace of deep sleep. This transition is not an abrupt shift or a reluctant surrender to biological necessity, but rather a graceful flowing movement that honors both the extraordinary spiritual experiences of the night and the body's need for restorative rest. The quality of consciousness during this transitional period is unlike anything available to most modern people. Rather than the anxious mental activity that often accompanies contemporary bedtime routines, the rehearsal of tomorrow's obligations, the worry about unfinished tasks, the mental replay of the day's conflicts, the Stone Age mind settles naturally into a state of profound peace and trust. There is no resistance to sleep, no fear of dreams, no anxiety about the unknown challenges that tomorrow might bring. This trust emerges from a deep, experiential understanding of the natural cycles that govern all existence. Just as our ancestors trusted the sun to rise each morning and the seasons to follow their eternal pattern, they trusted sleep to provide whatever restoration and renewal was needed for the continuation of life. Sleep was not seen as a temporary death or a dangerous vulnerability, but rather as a sacred time when consciousness could explore realms of experience that are hidden from ordinary waking awareness. The physical preparation for this final descent into sleep is remarkably simple and yet profoundly satisfying. The dying embers of the fire provide just enough warmth to maintain comfort without creating distraction. The natural materials that surround each sleeping person, animal skins softened through careful preparation, woven grass mats, simple pillows stuffed with dried aromatic herbs, create a sensory environment that is both stimulating and soothing, engaging the senses without overwhelming them. The sounds of the night world create a natural lullaby that guides consciousness toward increasingly peaceful states. The gentle crackling of cooling embers, the soft rustle of leaves responding to barely perceptible air currents, the distant call of night birds, and the steady murmur of the nearby river all blend together to create an auditory environment that is both rich and calming. These sounds do not distract from rest but rather support it, providing a gentle acoustic embrace that makes sleep feel safe and welcome. The scents that surround Stone Age sleep are equally supportive of deep rest. The clean smell of wood smoke, the earthy fragrance of natural materials, the subtle aroma of wild herbs and grasses, and the fresh scent of moving water all combine to create an olfactory environment that signals to both body and mind that this is a safe, nurturing place where rest can be complete and unguarded. But perhaps most importantly, the social environment of Stone Age sleep provides a level of security and emotional support that makes truly deep rest possible. The knowledge that trusted community members are sleeping nearby, that experienced people are naturally alert to any potential dangers, and that the entire group shares responsibility for everyone's safety allows individuals to surrender completely to sleep without maintaining the unconscious vigilance that often prevents modern people from achieving deep rest. As people settle into their final sleeping positions for the night, there is often a natural period of gratitude and reflection that serves as a bridge between the day's experiences and the night's rest. This is not a formal practice or required ritual, but rather a spontaneous expression of appreciation for the day's gifts, successful foraging or hunting, pleasant social interactions, beautiful weather, moments of insight or inspiration, or simply the basic satisfaction of having lived another day in harmony with the natural world. This gratitude practice serves multiple functions that enhance the quality of both sleep and dreams. On a psychological level, ending the day with appreciation rather than worry creates positive emotional conditions that support restful sleep. On a spiritual level, gratitude maintains the sense of connection and harmony with larger forces that characterize the entire day's experience. On a practical level, reviewing the day's positive experiences reinforces learning and helps to integrate new knowledge and skills. The transition from gratitude and reflection to actual sleep follows natural patterns that honor both the need for rest and the continued activity of consciousness during sleep. Rather than trying to force sleep through willpower or pharmaceutical intervention, people simply allow consciousness to follow its natural tendency toward rest when the conditions are right. The mind gradually releases its grip on the events and concerns of the day, allowing thoughts to become increasingly dreamlike and fantastical. This natural transition period often includes what we might now call hypnagogic experiences, the vivid imagery, sudden insights, and creative inspirations that frequently occur at the boundary between waking and sleeping. Rather than being dismissed as meaningless hallucinations, these experiences were valued as important communications from the deeper levels of consciousness. People learned to pay gentle attention to these boundary experiences without trying to control or direct them, allowing them to unfold naturally and provide whatever insights or guidance they might contain. The actual moment of falling asleep in this ancient context is not experienced as a loss of consciousness but rather as a transition to a different mode of awareness. Sleep is understood as a time when consciousness is freed from the limitations of physical sensation and logical thinking, allowing it to explore vast inner landscapes and connect with sources of wisdom and guidance that are not available during ordinary waking hours. The quality of sleep that emerges from these ideal conditions is remarkable in its depth and restorative power. Without the artificial stimulation of electric lights, caffeine, alcohol, or electronic devices, the brain naturally produces the full spectrum of sleep stages in their proper proportions and timing. Deep, slow-wave sleep provides optimal physical restoration, while REM sleep supports memory consolidation, emotional processing, and creative insight. But beyond these purely biological functions, Stone Age sleep served important spiritual and psychological purposes that our modern understanding of sleep is only beginning to appreciate. Dreams were understood as opportunities for communication with spiritual forces, for receiving guidance about practical decisions, for processing emotional conflicts, and for maintaining connection with deceased ancestors and other non-physical beings who continue to play important roles in community life. The social aspects of Stone Age sleep were equally important for maintaining psychological and emotional well-being. Sleeping in proximity to other community members, particularly family members, provided ongoing emotional support and security that continued even during unconscious hours. The subtle sounds of others breathing, moving, and occasionally murmuring in their sleep served as constant reminders of connection and belonging that enhanced rather than disturbed the sleep experience. As we observe this ancient community settling into the deepest phase of nighttime rest, we begin to understand how profoundly different their relationship with sleep was from our modern experience. For them, sleep was not a necessary interruption of productive activity, but rather an integral part of a complete, balanced life that honored all aspects of human nature and need. The peace that settles over the settlement as people sink into deep sleep is not merely the absence of activity, but rather the presence of something profoundly positive and life-affirming. This is the peace that comes from living in complete harmony with natural rhythms, from feeling completely secure in the support of community, and from trusting completely in the wisdom and benevolence of the larger forces that govern existence. As this ancient night reaches its deepest, most sacred hour, we find ourselves cradled in the same profound peace that has embraced human consciousness for countless millennia. The settlement around us has become a sanctuary of rest, where each breathing being participates in the great cosmic rhythm of activity and repose that governs all existence. This is not merely sleep as we understand it in our modern world, but rather a sacred communion with the deepest mysteries of consciousness and the most fundamental patterns of life itself. The fire has settled into its most gentle state, the coals glowing with the soft radiance of stars brought down to earth. This minimal light creates just enough visibility to maintain a sense of place and orientation while allowing the natural darkness to work its ancient magic on human consciousness. In this perfect balance between light and shadow, the boundary between the physical world and the realm of dreams becomes beautifully permeable, allowing consciousness to move freely between different levels of reality and awareness. The air itself seems to pulse with the slow, steady rhythm of collective breathing, as the entire community participates unconsciously in the great respiratory rhythm that connects all living beings. Each breath becomes a prayer, each exhalation a release of the day's accumulated tensions, each inhalation a renewal of life force and spiritual energy. The breathing gradually deepens and slows, synchronizing with the ancient rhythms that have guided human rest since the very beginning of our species. In this profound stillness, we begin to understand sleep not as a temporary absence of consciousness but rather as consciousness exploring different dimensions of existence. The dreams that emerge from Stone Age sleep are not the fragmented, anxiety-driven scenarios that often characterize modern dreaming, but rather coherent, meaningful journeys through landscapes of symbol and metaphor that provide guidance, healing, and spiritual nourishment. These dreams often take the form of encounters with animal spirits, conversations with ancestors, journeys through sacred landscapes, or direct communication with the elemental forces that govern natural phenomena. Unlike modern dreams, which are often dismissed as meaningless psychological activity, Stone Age dreams were understood as important sources of practical guidance for daily life. A dream about finding water might lead to the discovery of a new spring. A dream about animal behavior might provide crucial information for a successful hunt. A dream about plant medicine might offer the cure for a persistent illness. The integration of dream wisdom into waking life was seamless and natural. People woke not with the confused disorientation that often follows modern sleep, but rather with clear memory of their dream experiences and intuitive understanding of their significance. Dreams were shared openly within the community, discussed and interpreted collectively, and used as sources of guidance for both individual decisions and community planning. The deeper phases of Stone Age sleep were characterized by a quality of rest that modern sleep medicine is only beginning to understand and appreciate. Without the artificial stimulation that disrupts natural sleep cycles, the brain was able to move through all the necessary stages of sleep in their optimal proportions and timing. The result was not just physical restoration, but also emotional healing, memory consolidation, and spiritual renewal that prepared each person for another day of meaningful engagement with life. During the deepest phases of sleep, many Stone Age people experienced what can only be described as mystical union with the cosmic forces that govern existence. In these states, individual consciousness merged temporarily with the vast intelligence that coordinates the movements of stars, the changing of seasons, and the intricate dance of all living systems. These experiences provided not just spiritual fulfillment, but also practical wisdom about how to live in harmony with natural law and cosmic order. The quality of rest achieved during these deep sleep phases was so complete and restorative that people often woke naturally feeling fully refreshed after relatively short periods of actual sleep. The absence of sleep debt, sleep disorders, and the chronic fatigue that plagues modern life was not just due to physical factors, but also to the psychological and spiritual dimensions of Stone Age sleep that addressed all levels of human need and restoration. As the night moves toward its conclusion, the sleep of our ancient ancestors takes on an almost ceremonial quality. This is the sacred time when consciousness journeys furthest from ordinary reality, exploring realms of experience that are normally hidden from waking awareness. In these deep states, people often encounter the archetypal forces and primordial energies that shape both individual psychology and collective destiny. The healing that took place during these deepest phases of sleep was comprehensive and profound. Physical injuries were repaired, emotional traumas were processed and integrated, spiritual imbalances were corrected, and the entire system was returned to a state of optimal harmony and function. This healing was not seen as separate from ordinary sleep, but rather as one of its most important and natural functions. The dreams that characterized the pre-dawn hours often took on a prophetic quality, providing glimpses of future possibilities, warnings about potential challenges, or guidance about important decisions that lay ahead. These prophetic dreams were not considered supernatural phenomena, but rather natural expressions of the deep intelligence that operates beneath ordinary consciousness and that has access to information not available to the logical, analytical mind. As the first hints of dawn begin to touch the eastern horizon, the quality of sleep naturally begins to lighten, moving gradually from the deep, unconscious states of midnight toward the more active dream states that prepare consciousness for the return to waking life. This transition is not abrupt or jarring, but rather follows the same gentle, natural rhythm that has characterized the entire night's journey through the landscapes of sleep and dream. The final dreams of the night often take the form of gifts or blessings that prepare each person for the coming day. These might be dreams of successful hunting or gathering, visions of beautiful weather and favorable conditions, encounters with helpful spirits or ancestors, or simply experiences of profound peace and contentment that provide emotional and spiritual resources for meeting whatever challenges the new day might bring. As consciousness gradually rises toward the surface of awareness, preparing for the eventual return to waking life, there is no anxiety or resistance to the ending of this sacred time. Instead, there is a natural sense of completion and fulfillment, a feeling that the night has provided exactly what was needed for restoration, renewal, and spiritual nourishment. The approach of dawn is welcomed not as an interruption of rest, but as the natural conclusion of a complete cycle of rest and renewal. The awakening that will eventually come will be as gentle and natural as the sleep that preceded it, following the same organic rhythms that have guided human consciousness through countless cycles of activity and rest. There will be no harsh alarms, no artificial urgency, no jarring transition from the peaceful world of sleep to the demanding world of waking responsibility. Instead, consciousness will rise naturally, like a flower opening to the sun, ready to begin another day of meaningful engagement with the beautiful, challenging, endlessly fascinating adventure of human existence. In this final phase of our journey through Stone Age sleep, we experience something that our modern world has almost entirely lost: the profound peace that comes from complete trust in the natural order, complete faith in the wisdom of our own deepest nature, and complete confidence in the support and love that flows through all existence. This is not the temporary relaxation that comes from escaping problems, but rather the deep, abiding peace that emerges from knowing our proper place in the cosmic order and feeling completely at home in the vast, mysterious, beautiful universe that is our eternal dwelling place. And so we rest, cradled in the same ancient rhythms that have sustained human consciousness since the very beginning, surrounded by the same natural forces that continue to guide and support us even in our modern world, connected to the same source of wisdom and love that will continue to flow through all generations yet to come. In this timeless moment of perfect rest, we touch something eternal and unchanging, something that transcends all the temporary concerns and anxieties of ordinary life, something that reminds us who we really are and why we are here. Sleep well, dear traveler, in the sacred embrace of our most ancient home.